Welcome to Nutrition Rounds with Dr. Danielle Belardo, the podcast for anyone interested in learning about plant-based nutrition through an evidence-based approach. Every week, we share insights and interviews with physicians who are leading experts in nutrition and health. Whether you've been plant-based for many years or are still searching for the perfect diet, Nutrition Rounds will inspire and empower you to live your healthiest life backed by science. Now here's your host, Dr. Danielle Belardo, MD.
Hello, and we are back on Nutrition Rounds. I know it's been a long time, and we have a lot to discuss. I missed you guys. I hope everyone's doing well, and I just wanted to briefly introduce my co-host for today, who is Dr. Kevin Klatt. Kevin, give a quick hello.
Hello.
Before we get into all the information about Dr. Klatt, you're going to get to know him quite intimately. But first and foremost, I just want to take a moment to discuss everything that's been going on in the last several months since we last had a podcast episode. So as you guys know, if you follow me on social media, I've been quite vocal about two of the most major things that have been going on in the world. The first that started really occurring in March was this outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. And I actually was redeployed from cardiology service to internal medicine to help with the peak. It was entirely, unexpected. This pandemic has been really life-changing for everyone out there. I know whether you're in healthcare, medicine, or whether you are someone that is not in healthcare at all and nowhere in medicine, I know that everyone's been affected in one shape or form or the other, whether it's economically, physically, or even in your own health and social life and psychological health. So I just want to send my love to everyone out there. If you follow me on social media, you know I've been really passionate about sharing as much information as I can about COVID during this time because it's been really crazy and a lot of fast information and misinformation out there. And I just wanted to address that and just tell you guys that I'm thinking of all of you and I'm really wishing everyone good health. And I cannot not discuss one of the other most important things that have been happening for years and years and years and years and years, but especially has come to the forefront of everyone's minds is everything that has been happening with the Black community in the United States. The longstanding systemic racism that should have been addressed by all of us, frankly, forever. And many people in the Black community obviously have been continuing to discuss this for years and years. But now it's getting the biggest attention possible, which is deserved because of the murder of George Floyd. And if you follow me on social media again, you know that I've been incredibly loud and vocal about the importance of how Black lives matter, how we need to support Black individuals in medicine, our Black colleagues in medicine, nurses, nurse practitioners, registered dietitians. We need to uplift the voices of all of our Black colleagues, support Black businesses. And, the state of the world it's been, 2020's been rough. But I just want to acknowledge here first and foremost that systemic racism is a major issue. It's a health issue. It's a health issue for every single one of our patients that suffers from any sort of health disparity that is a result of the longstanding racism in this country. And I have a lot of plans in line to try to narrow that gap and make a difference, which we'll discuss. But I first and foremost just want to send my love also to everyone in the U.S. that is suffering, everyone in the Black community that's suffered or has been suffering from this longstanding racism that we face. And I stand 100% in solidarity with you. I've been to multiple protests, and I just want to extend my love. And I know Kevin wants to share some of his thoughts too.
Yeah, I echo everything that you said and have been thinking a lot about, particularly within the dietetics community and the nutrition space kind of at large and the wellness space, how much of it is, by white people, made for white people, and is extremely exclusionary. I mean, if you look at the demographic breakdowns of dietitians, there are only about 3% of dietitians that self-identify as Black, about 90% self-identify as white, and it has been this way for a very long time. And I think I've been trying to do things as much as I can behind the scenes to figure out what we can do to address the major barriers and the systemic racism that keeps registered dietitians just a white profession. Because it's a huge issue, not only in us as practitioners that are not able to meet all the needs of the Black community, since we were mostly a white female profession. But then also just in the way you look at how that trickles down into what our food plates look like and our nutrition recommendations look like. It's just, they're overwhelmingly not culturally diverse in any way whatsoever. And there are clear blind spots and things that I'm sure harm our patients in ways that we don't even understand. So eliminating the systemic barriers to becoming a dietitian is something that I think is on my mind a lot more than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, we see a similar pattern in medicine. Only 2% of physicians are Black, that are female physicians are Black. And it's really just unfortunate because of the fact that this has just been such a long-standing process. And although it feels like change is happening, I know for my Black friends, they feel like the change is not happening fast enough. I mean, this has been so ongoing. And as a white person who cannot even imagine what it's like to grow up in America, Black, and to face racism your entire life throughout your entire educational process, and then to choose, to go to medical school and to battle racism as a physician, I just have so much respect for all of my colleagues in medicine all of my Black friends who have just went above and beyond to overcome these barriers. And I have just so much respect for all of them. I have no even words for how much they've been doing. And I'm sure that everyone listening, if you haven't been really vocal about Black Lives Matter prior to this, I totally can relate. I think that a lot of us feel like although I've always considered myself an ally and to the Black community, and I have a lot of Black friends, it's not enough and it hasn't been enough. So now I really want to make sure that I'm actively doing things to improve Black lives all over the country through nutrition. And that actually segues into a little bit. I want you guys to meet Kevin Klatt because we've created a program, and we are going to be having a program that's going to be helping Black individuals with health through nutrition. And so we'll come back to Black Lives Matter because it's incredibly important. And I have some amazing Black businesses I want to share with you and other things I want to discuss. But just to kind of loop everything together right now, I want to introduce you guys to Kevin Klatt. So if you guys follow me on social media, you probably already know all about Kevin and all about what we're doing at IOPBM. But just a little brief overview. Kevin Klatt is hands down the most brilliant nutrition scientist I've ever met. But also, I think it's pretty much widely accepted around the world that he's one of the most brilliant nutrition scientists in the world. So I'm very fortunate to know him and to work with him. He is really just well-trained. He trained with his PhD at Cornell. He did his dietetics training at NIH. He has published a ton of research. He is incredibly brilliant and thoughtful, and also really comes from a really great perspective of nutrition science with a really fair, unbiased perspective, and has taught me so much. And I'm so fortunate that Kevin is going to help me we're creating a program at the Institute of Plant-Based Medicine called Learn with IOPBM. And in this program, we're going to offer multiple courses, and we'll talk to you guys about that a little bit later, but we're offering multiple courses in nutrition science and nutrition information for health. But what's most important is for any doctors that are listening, or any nurse practitioners or any providers, we have, starting with our first course in September, we have a scholarship program for which any patient of yours in the Black community that you think could benefit from our course on coronary artery disease and nutrition, or hypertension and nutrition, or AFib and nutrition, any of our online courses, we want you to email scholarship@DanielleBellardoMD.com, and please email us and nominate your patients, because we will be giving them the courses 100% for free. And in addition to that, we also have Dr. Sandema Tar, who you may know. She's a foot and ankle surgeon. She's phenomenal. She's my idol. She is vegan. She is a strong, Black, brilliant woman who is really passionate about healthcare disparities. And she's going to be our course director for all of our courses that are going to be aimed to target health and wellness in the Black community, especially targeting issues with regards to some of the misconceptions in plant-based nutrition, making sure it's culturally appropriate. So we're really excited to have an entire arm of our Learn program that is going to be dedicated to reaching the Black community and helping to increase the amount of information about nutrition that's out there in a sensitive and culturally appropriate way.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it. And I hope it's something that we can just empower and amplify. And I don't want to center ourselves or IOPBM throughout this process. So definitely, if you have recommendations or feedback for us, let us know over time. But I think these courses will address, at least cardiometabolic diseases at first. And I think we all know that they have they have distributions that are directly linked to systemic racism, and the Black communities are disproportionately affected. And part of that is access to healthy foods. So one of our goals, I think, is to raise awareness about the impact of nutrition on those at least risk factors and outcomes for cardiometabolic diseases, and then get a conversation going a lot more about how do we remove not only to empower the individual to make changes, but how do we remove barriers to those healthy eating changes?
Absolutely. We have so much exciting stuff coming ahead. And one quick thing I did want to share with you all, especially because just like Kevin said, I want to amplify the voices in the Black community, especially in the Black vegan community and Black businesses, Black-owned businesses that are so amazing. So I just wanted to list out a few for you guys right now that I wanted you to check out. These are Black-owned vegan businesses that I really think are just all phenomenal. They're run and owned by amazing people. And I really think now's the time that we can all put our money into places that, really support all of the Black lives all across the country. So one is, if you go to Instagram, it's at Berry Vegan Delights. And by the way, I'm going to put these all in the show notes. At Berry Vegan Delights, they essentially have these handcrafted fruit desserts. They're just amazing. They have like chocolate covered strawberries and pretzels and just amazing things you can ship, I think, pretty much everywhere. You can order online, and they are like unbelievable, and they're all vegan. And then I also want you guys to know about Wear It All Vegan. They're a vegan soul food, amazing place, and they're located in Columbus, Ohio. They just have phenomenal, just vegan soul food, all different vegan food in general, and they're just also owned by just a really incredible group of people. Then an amazing vegan chef and caterer is Joe Veganista. And don't worry, these will all be in my show notes, so you guys can just jump over there and follow them right away. But she has a bunch of stuff on Amazon, a book. She's a chef. She's an author. She's a caterer. She's unbelievable. And supporting Black women especially is incredibly important to me. And then Power Plant Kitchen. This is Chef Ishmael. He's been cooking vegan for 20 years. He's also fantastic, amazing. Please head over to support him as well. He's incredible. Then Too Good Eats. So it's _good_eats on Instagram. They're amazing. They're this undeniably delicious gourmet frozen pops. They're made with fruits and vegetables. They're all vegan, no added sugar. They cater. They're also located in Columbus, Ohio. They're phenomenal. Then also a Juice Av. It's just juice.av at Instagram. They're incredible. They do juices, sea moss orders, amazing business owned by Black individuals. Then we have Cbi Vegan, literally just Cbi Vegan, and it's Can't Believe It's Vegan. They offer amazing plant-based dishes. They're phenomenal. Then Nile Vegan, it's authentic vegan Ethiopian food that is just incredible. You can check them out. Then also Willowbee's Soul Veg. This is a restaurant that is just tons of amazing vegan food. And even if you don't live locally to them, you may as well check out their Instagram because they have just so many vegan options and like a lot of food inspiration. Plant-based Lifestyle Cafe, which is a vegan restaurant that is just also has a ton of great inspiration and food on their page constantly. The Vegan Donut Co. is unbelievable. I mean, just the most unbelievable donuts. They're so delicious. They just are gorgeous. And so their Instagram is unbelievable if you guys want to check them out. And then there's a few Instagram accounts of just really, really, really inspirational women in the vegan community that are Black that I would love for you guys to follow. One is I Loves Life. It's IYE.LOVES loves.life. She's a vegan activist. She's brilliant. She is just so strong. She's compassionate, and she speaks about Black Lives Matter. She speaks about animal rights and animal liberation, and she's just wonderful. I would love for you guys to check her out. And then also Jess from Vegan Street Fair. I mean, so Vegan Street Fair is unbelievable. There's just like this huge street fair that happens in North Hollywood, California. Obviously, since COVID, they haven't had any events, but Jess has been doing a ton online, and she's just so inspirational. She's been talking a lot about how Black Lives Matter in the vegan community and how we can all come together and support Black-owned vegan businesses. And I would just love for you guys to check out Jess. She's amazing. And of course, I'm sure, so two of the men that are so wonderful in the vegan community that I really hope you guys are all following is Doms Thompson. He is a vegan activist, athlete, creator. He has Eat What Elephants Eat, which is a great meal planning program. It's vegan, and he's just a phenomenal inspiration. And as well as Badass Vegan. I'm sure many of you are already following them. But I just wanted to give you guys it's not an exhaustive list. There's tons more companies and businesses, but I just wanted to give you guys a handful to follow for even just some inspiration. Diversify your Instagram feed and just uplift those in the vegan community, our Black, amazing members of the vegan community that have done so much. And that inspire us. So my last pitch for donations too is near and dear to my heart is the Association of Black Cardiologists. If you are in the position to donate right now, I think they're an amazing organization. They help to bring light to a lot of the issues with cardiovascular disease in the Black population. And yeah, it's super important to me. Any other dietetic groups, Kevin, you want to plug?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as we'll talk about in a bit, I think our goal is to really bridge the gap between dietitians and registered dietitians and other healthcare professionals, because there's often too much of a gap. So anybody out there, healthcare professional or not, there is a organization called Diversify Dietetics that is specifically trying to address the demographics that I talked about earlier and helping people navigate the process of becoming a dietitian. Not many people know that not only does becoming a dietitian require basically a 4-year degree with a core set of courses that you get a certificate for, but it requires an unpaid year after that for overwhelming majority of individuals who aren't doing their clinical rotations as part of a master's degree. And it's a similar match system, but it requires basically it's unpaid, and it often has a tuition associated with it. So it can often come up to be like basically paying for a 5th year if you're attaching it to your undergrad. And so that's quite expensive, and you can imagine it's quite exclusionary. And it's also weird to get loans for because most loan companies have never heard of a dietetic internship. There are a lot of financial barriers, but then there are also just struggles of, I think we all know, if you're a Black person who's navigating an entirely white female profession, there can just be systemic racism comes in at many points along that process. Diversified Dietetics does a lot to help individuals who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, who are trying to navigate this process, which can also often be confusing and have a lot of barriers that are set up against the Black community. So Diversified Dietetics is a good follow on Instagram. I think they're also on Facebook as well. They have a donate section on their website that I'll also send to Danielle if you're in the position to donate. There's a newer group, also the Boston Alliance for Diversity and Dietetics, that's active on Twitter. And they're doing similar things to what Diversified Dietetics is trying to do to just improve diversity within the entire profession. And there's also All Access Dietetics, which also provides similar attempts to lower the bar to becoming a dietitian. And they've been quite vocal about systemic racism in the recent months, particularly. And I mean, there are individual Black dietitians that I've started to follow a lot more of recently. Because I don't like Instagram nutrition mostly, but I'm trying to get into it at Danielle's suggestion. But through Diversified Dietetics, I've followed a lot of great voices, and I think I would recommend starting there. And you can find the same. And yeah, that's sort of the major ones within dietetics that are working to really affect change. There's also groups like Weight Inclusive Dietetics that are sort of talking about the issues around our kind of messed up diet culture and their interactions with systemic racism as well. So Heather Kaplan in the DC area does a bunch of work in that space that I would give a shout out to her as well.
Amazing. Well, I think that what's really great is that this will not be the last you hear from us on how important Black lives are and how much we want to reach out to the Black community. You'll be hearing from us a lot about this, and our new course director for diversity and equity, Sudema Tar. And so stay tuned for that, because we want to really make sure that this is not a fleeting moment of support, that we are continuing this throughout IOPBM. So you guys now, if you haven't followed me on Instagram or social media, you may be listening to this and be like a little confused. Like, if you have followed me on social media, you probably know everything that's been going on. But if you haven't, you're probably like, who's Kevin? What's IOPBM? What are you talking about? So just to, kind of wrap it all together, as you guys also may know, wow, it's been a pretty crazy few months. I also just graduated cardiology fellowship. I am now done with all of my medical training. I'm officially a cardiologist. Woohoo. And so now I am finally going to be joining practice. I am going to be working in Newport Beach, California, at the Institute of Plant-Based Medicine with a bunch of brilliant other like-minded physicians, registered dietitians. I'm going to be the director of cardiology there, and I'll be working with Angie Sadeghi. If any of you know her, she's a brilliant gastroenterologist who already works in Newport. I'm going to be working with Melissa Mandala, Micah Yu, James and Dahlia Marin. And Kevin here is going to be, not only have we been so honored and lucky to pull him in to be my co-director of education for IOPBM, but he's also going to be the registered dietitian for all of our cardiovascular patients. He's going to be operating via telehealth, so that way you can see him from pretty much anywhere. But his skills are unmatched, and his knowledge in cardiovascular nutrition is phenomenal, which is why we are excited to have Kevin on our team as a dietitian, but also to help us with a lot of other stuff at IOPBM, which I'm going to go through and kind of explain now, because I've been getting a lot of questions. So starting with, I'll talk about my cardiovascular practice later, but most importantly, I want to start with our education program, which is rolling out soon. So essentially what happened was, as you guys know, I've been kind of on a journey with my knowledge about nutrition for like the last several years. I've been vegan for a really long time, but my understanding about nutrition science, I think that it's one of those things where I've realized the more you know, the more you don't know. The more I've learned, the more I've recognized, wow, I think I was a little skewed in my view on some of the nutrition science back in the day, where I didn't really understand how to interpret nutrition science. I wasn't paying attention enough to the methods. I was really just kind of focusing on the abstracts, and I was focusing a lot on what people were telling me to believe. And this is where we get into the title of this episode, which is Eminence-Based Nutrition versus Evidence-Based Nutrition. When I started to work with Kevin, I started to realize, oh, wow, it's really interesting. I don't think I've actually understood nutrition science as much. And instead of just having someone tell me, well, this is what the data says, I started to do much more deep dive into the literature and realize, wow, I think I've been actually kind of more biased with my viewpoint, and my nutrition understanding has expanded. And so we are so fortunate to have Kevin on our team, because through Learn with IOPBM, we are going to be debuting in September our first course series for everyone. So whether you are a physician or a nurse or a registered dietitian or a patient, our cardiovascular disease courses are meant for everyone. They are at a level that everyone can understand. But the most exciting part is that they have just been accredited for CME approval. So if you are in healthcare, you're going to be able to get CME credit for these, or continuing education credit as well for these courses. All the information is on our website at learn.iopbm.org. But I really wanted to let you guys get to know Kevin, because this has been such a passion project of mine, because I've really on my own had quite an evolution in my view of nutrition, as you can tell if you follow me on social media. So I just first wanted to just have Kevin kind of talk a little bit about himself and his own kind of journey in nutrition and what he's done research on. And Kevin, if you don't mind, for anyone that doesn't follow me on social media and hasn't gotten to know you through Instagram or Twitter yet, can you give everyone just a bit of a summary, expanded summary about you and kind of how you got into nutrition in the first place?
Sure. I got into nutrition back in high school. I actually ended up losing 85 pounds in about a year's time during high school. And I had been really interested in just, how disparate the viewpoints were online and how everybody had this sort of religious zeal for their favorite diet. And that sort of evolved as I went to college, and I ended up changing to being a science major. And I think, it's kind of funny when I look back on it now. I came into college as a languages major, like with Italian. I took Italian, Latin, and Chinese in high school, and I was like, oh, I have to keep on with this. And part of with languages, there's so much that's like lost in translation. I remember I went to Catholic school and I was like very interested in how the Bible was translated over time and how things were interpreted. And nutrition has so much of that, where there's a lot that gets lost in translation. Or can get the ambiguities of things can get distilled down into something overly dogmatic when things are translated. And so as I progressed through my undergrad science career, I realized I wanted to be not only just an RD to have the clinical side of nutrition, but I also wanted to do more research and something a little bit more intense. The RD credential is a great, and RDs are amazing, but their expertise is really in the clinical and practical aspects of feeding. And a lot of the nutrition science and metabolism at a little bit more of an advanced level is more something you need a PhD to get. So I set out on a path, and ultimately, after a bit of a long and narrow road, if anybody has questions about how to become an RD and finish a PhD, you can chat about me with me.
So one quick question to interrupt you on that, yeah. I actually don't know the answer to. So you went from undergrad to your PhD, and then did you do your dietetics internship after your PhD or before? How did that work?
I did my undergrad it's technically in biological anthropology, because my undergrad did not have a dietetics program or even a nutrition science degree. But I was able to take most of the core, like all of the core science courses in doing that. And I think that undergrad in anthro actually gave me like a pretty profound appreciation for the ability of humans to adapt to a wide array of environments, which I think still colors my perspective on nutrition today. I spent a lot of time in my anthropology undergrad just like learning about all the food anthropology and how anthropologists had done work in different indigenous populations across the globe and what their diets were and how resilient humans are. And then so I did 1 year of a master's DPD program, although I did not finish the master's. I just took a bunch of the DPD courses. And then I went into Cornell's PhD. And then I applied for dietetic internships at the end of my PhD, which it's fun to be writing a dissertation and applying for dietetic internships. But then I did my DI at the NIH Clinical Center, which is like doing clinical dietetics, but in a research population. And then I moved to Baylor College of Medicine, which is where I'm currently at now in the Department of Pediatrics. And then I also moonlight in the Department of Cell Molecular Biology. But my dissertation research was largely sort of at the, I was in a lab that was interested in a metabolic pathway. It's called 1-carbon metabolism, and it's where a lot of the B vitamins intersect, as well as nutrients like choline. So it was fun. I wanted to do something like that because it would allow me to sit at this sort of, it's a metabolic hub, I guess you could say, where you link into lipid metabolism and phospholipid metabolism and vitamin metabolism and a number of vitamins. Most people in their PhD in nutrition will study like one vitamin or one mineral, but I was fortunate enough to kind of get to do this. I get to study a number of different nutrients and metabolic pathways, but I got to do some work on choline and pregnancy. And then I also did some work on different types of fatty acids, both omega-3 fatty acids, but also different types of saturated fatty acids, depending on their chain length. And that took me, and then in my clinical time, I also did some research as well in just childhood malnutrition and different types of rare cancers and emerging immunotherapies, which was fun. And then now I've sort of continued on with some of my dissertation work, sort of straddling still. In my PhD, I got to work in both cell and animal models, as well as in human feeding and supplementation trials. And I'm trying to keep that up now still. So it's sort of fun to span the the whole spectrum. Usually the ability to do research in both basic sciences and clinical stuff is reserved for more MD PhDs. So I feel pretty lucky that there's an opportunity as an RD PhD to get to engage in all of that.
I think that's a really good point. There's a lot of medical students, but of course also a ton of undergrad students that listen to my podcast. And I think that you and Nicola Guess have been two RD PhDs that I've become very close with and learned a lot from you both. And I think it's interesting for everyone who's listening, if you're in college and you're exploring health sciences careers, to think about it. I don't think that it comes to the top of people's radar, and I think it's a really nice combination where you get the clinical work and the research aspect of it, and you get to, do the combo, and it kind of has the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think the training combined of a PhD in nutrition science and then the RD is really ideal for tackling a lot of the issues that we're thinking about in nutrition. It's certainly an uphill battle. I mean, I always joke that the PhD RD combined gives me just a little bit less respect than an MD alone. But you kind of have to earn, you have to, people have a perception of dietetics, particularly because it grew out of the field of home economics. So it's sort of, you have this uphill battle of like the old school ideologies that nutrition science is like the old boys club of biochemistry and dietetics is the home econ field, and there's obvious sexist roots that come into there. So straddling the two it's not done all that often. There are only there's a handful of PhD RDs that you can see over time who have really pulled in substantial grant money and have been involved in a lot of the major feeding studies and a lot of the major even like social determinants of health kind of research there. But the NIH doesn't necessarily love like PhD RDs more than PhDs, and definitely don't compete with MDs necessarily in the grant writing process. So there's still, much like nurse practitioners had to advocate for themselves and veterinary medical doctors had to advocate for themselves. I think there's a growing contingent of PhD RDs who are advocating that we have a very unique perspective that we can add to the scientific process. And I'm happy to be a part of that group of growing folks who are trying to make sure that people realize that there is a unique expertise brought by the combined synthesis of these sort of programs.
That's a great point. I think that especially with regards to you having both clinical experience plus your extensive research experience, I mean, your understanding of nutrition science is unparalleled because, you understand all the different levels of evidence. And one of the big things that we talk about all the time is it's not just being able to read the abstract. It's like understanding the actual study, limitations of a study, what is a good study. And through your PhD work and through all of your research experience, you've also been able to apply all you understand about nutrition clinically to patients through being an RD as well. So it really is a great combination. And we're just so happy to have you and work with you. And you've personally, of course, really changed and shifted my views of nutrition and nutrition science, not by telling me what to think by any means, but by explaining and helping me kind of develop my own ability to understand nutrition science. And that is actually one of the most exciting things we're excited to do about our courses because, as anyone listening knows, there's so much confusion and nuance in the nutrition space. I mean, if you talk to someone that loves keto, they'll tell you that carbs, are the devil, which is, of course, we all know is not true. If you talk to some of the folks in the whole food, plant-based, no oil crowd, they'll tell you that olive oil causes heart disease or makes heart disease worse. Well, that's actually also not true. So there's a lot of nuance. And instead of just listening to us, we actually just want everyone who takes our courses to be able to understand the information and the research and be able to evaluate research for themselves and then see what they think. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you, Kevin, was how do you think that Learn with IOPBM, these courses, will help patients looking to understand nutrition science? So how do you think that the courses we're developing, our first courses in September, how do you think that this will empower patients to understand all of these nuances and craziness that's happening in nutrition?
Well, I think we definitely have practical, evidence-based things that we're going to recommend at one point, but I'm most excited for our Intro to Nutrition Science and Intro to Plant-Based courses that are on the first day that we have scheduled, because I think, a lot of dietitians and nutrition scientists look at most of the media around nutrition that people find confusing often and just sort of roll our eyes. And we roll our eyes because if you understand the methods of nutrition you know that there's either the media headlines are either inherently unscientific, the way that they're worded, or the questions put forth are inherently unscientific, or there's just some nuance there that is lost, or there's ambiguity in the interpretation of the results that's being ignored. And I can often look at a media headline and design the study for you that was done that they're reporting on without ever having looked at the study. And then 9 times out of 10, I go and look at the original manuscript. I'm like, yep, it's pretty predictable that this was a prospective cohort, or this was a randomized controlled trial, and these are the methods that they used. And the media is not talking to you about the limitations of that. And oftentimes in nutrition, what we look for is a congruence across a number of different types of evidence. So, you have people who do food diaries or answer questionnaires about what they eat, and then it's correlated over time with some negative heart disease endpoint or something like that. Or you have a short-term feeding trial where we measure some surrogate outcome like blood cholesterol levels or whatever. And then over time, we hope that those sort of things all point in the same direction because they all have their own limitations. Oftentimes the feeding trials are very short-term, and you have to extrapolate what that means out to the long-term, or the cohort studies. They might have long-term endpoint data, but we're concerned about how accurate the food recalls or the questionnaire data is. And I think once people start to understand all the different lines of evidence that we have and some of the nuances of nutrition science, you can make a much better informed decision for yourself, and you don't have to rely on trying to understand what the media is telling you about. Because unfortunately, and it's not all the media's fault, a lot of it is university press releases as well, trying to make a splashy name about their university in the news. But there's not an incentive structure within the media to get nutrition right and present things in a very nuanced way and say, well, the study found this that could be interpreted this way or this way. It often loses that ambiguity, and there's a lot of potential for bias to enter in. And I think across the space, the thing you and I have talked about the most is that the bias of the individual predominates, and then people fit the evidence to support that bias at baseline. So people have a preformed conclusion, and they just look for the evidence that supports what they're saying. And sometimes a food frequency questionnaire based study will be bad because they don't like the conclusions of it. And then other times a food frequency questionnaire study will be good because they like the conclusions of it. And it's just not really a fair look at the evidence. So I hope to empower people with understanding how a dietitian or a nutrition scientist thinks about things, and let them, and honestly, I hope I get you to the point of, or hope we can get to the point together of just ignoring most of the media headlines, because that they're just there to get clicks and ad revenues most of the time. And they're not really helping you holistically assess the evidence and make informed decisions about your health.
I totally agree, especially with regards to the media headlines. I mean, we even seen that with COVID, they jump on preprint or just some really crummy data, and then it just kind of takes up a life of its own. And the same thing happens in nutrition for years and years. I actually don't think that Kevin has given himself enough bragging, which he is very deserving of, just to kind of explain to you guys how legit Kevin is in nutrition. So he was, and this is going to embarrass him, and he's probably going to get mad at me, but he was actually recently the recipient of the inaugural Dennis Beer, MD, Young Career Editor for the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This is one of the most prestigious accomplishments in academic nutrition. And, Kevin is one of the most respected nutrition scientists in the world. So I think that since he's literally an editor of one of the major nutrition journals, if not the most major nutrition journal that exists, I think that his evaluation of nutrition science and his ability to, really bring that scientific and that make all of us feel like we're a scientist and evaluating the data ourselves is really unmatched anywhere else. And I think that a big thing that we're doing at IOPBM is, we're really, like Kevin said before, we're bridging the gaps between RDs and MDs. Even me and Kevin, as we're building our courses for September, we're going to have an Intro to Plant-Based Nutrition course, Introduction to Nutrition Science, and then on Sunday, the September 20th, the second day, it'll be all cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, AFib, systolic and diastolic heart failure. even as we're preparing our courses, we're talking about, half the course is going to be clinical from a medical standpoint, from a doctor's perspective, and then half the course is going to be from Kevin's nutrition science standpoint, and we're learning from each other. There's just so much more to learn when you are combining MDs with RDs. We really just have just so much more to bring you guys with regards to research studies and data. And I think it's going to be unlike anything else, because what we really want to do is, my biggest frustration with scientific communication these days, and I've been a part of it, is this issue of eminence-based nutrition, eminence-based medicine. And I would love, Kevin, for you to kind of describe how you've avoided that, because so I will fully admit, and for anyone who doesn't understand what that is, it's instead of following evidence-based nutrition, where you're actually really, looking and giving a really rigorous dissection of all the nutrition science, your eminence-based nutrition or eminence-based anything, medicine, is you're kind of just following the viewpoint of some pillars in the community. And I've done that. I think I even read some of I read their primary literature and just didn't really dissect it enough, or have a good, astute enough ability to dissect nutrition science at the time. But I think that in nutrition groups, whether it's the keto groups or the low-fat plant-based group, I actually think even more powerful and brings a lot of food fear isn't even the news headlines, it's this eminence-based nutrition. There are patients in the keto sphere who literally fear bananas and mangoes, and then there are patients in the low-fat plant-based sphere who fear avocado and olive oil, and neither are warranted. So I would love for you to discuss kind of how you, through your nutrition training, you've avoided that. You've stayed really agnostic and just true to the science, which is what I am working to do every day.
Well, I think the biggest thing is I like food. And, and I became a dietitian, and I didn't become a physician because nutrition is almost never prescriptive. And the times it is prescriptive are very severe clinical conditions that folks have. And even then there's more flexibility than there is with medicine. Medicine is here's your script, here's the dosage, you take it this many times a day or whatever, or this many times a week. And we're trying to target some blood level, and it can be a little cut and dry, not to say that there's no art to medicine. But with food, the fun part is that even for nutrient-based recommendations, there's a million different ways that can be translated into food. And the level of evidence that we have is just really not strong enough to be, or deterministic enough to be as dogmatic as it ends up being. And I think that's not to be naive. I think a lot of folks get attached to diets because there's a group think and a community feel that comes out of it, and that's very comfortable. It serves a little bit of a role like religion can serve for people. And I think that that's fine. And I think people can make all of those decisions, and they can, after being informed about what nutrition science can actually reasonably answer for folks. And a lot of the nitty gritty details that people get a lot of anxiety about and are in our DMs being is this teaspoon of olive oil going to, just destroy my endothelial health? It ends up being something that I feel a little bit sad about, because I'm we've had people ask us for recipes about how do you make fried onions without oil? And I'm you could just enjoy the fried onions also. But and that's not to downplay people's worries at all. But the messaging that I try and focus on is that there are a lot of folks who have medical credentials, who should either know their scope of practice, and if they think nutrition is in their scope of practice, they should have way more command over the evidence base than they are currently exhibiting. And they put out messages that are so much more dogmatic than they need to be. And I think really run counter to a lot of the data that we have on how do you affect behavior change at a larger scale. And I think there's a lot of dietitians out there, in the plant-based space. I eat a relatively plant-based diet, but I don't identify as a vegan, and I don't eat 100% plant-based. So I only see a little bit of the community and hear what I hear from Danielle. But I know there are folks out there like Ginny Messina, who is at the Vegan RD on Twitter, who has a lot of blog posts about this same sort of issue, that the dogma really runs counter to our hopes of improving people's health and also improving planetary health, and for folks that it's a passion for them about animal welfare issues to touching on those as well. And that the need for an extremely stringent diet that is so medically indicated that you should be like fearing eating off that dietary plan is so rare, and the evidence so rarely indicates acting in such a way. So I mean, yeah, I avoid dogma because like if somebody's going to tell me I can't eat something because it's going to be like really bad for my health, the evidence better be pretty strong for that. And I think that, that's something that sort of centers me on making sure that I'm reading the evidence and saying, okay, this could be, they use these methods, they measure these outcomes, and here's all the different ways we could interpret it. Here are the strengths, here are the limitations, which is really what we do in research at the end of the day. But
Right.
I think a lot of how that gets distilled in social media spaces, there's just some incentive structures within social media that you're trying to get clicks, you're trying to have a community, and the science can get lost in all that. So what I want to do to folks is help them understand the science a bit more, but then the science in nutrition is so often not definitive, though people pretend it is, and that doesn't allow for your cultural background to come in and your own personal beliefs to come in nearly as much to the decisions you make around food. And I think that there are many, many inputs about why we eat what we eat. And oftentimes the nutrition spaces online can be so overly prescriptive that it butts out your reason for eating a bunch of other things. And it doesn't allow for as flexible a diet that really allows you to prioritize your whatever is important to you related to food when it comes down to what you eat.
I agree, but I agree with everything you said, and the reason why I have so much empathy for patients on both ends of the spectrum. Like I know I keep comparing them, but patients that follow the keto diet, that are like really, really love the keto diet, they fear carbohydrates, and then there's patients who are on a really low fat plant-based diet and they fear any sort of fat. I have empathy for both these groups of patients and the fact that they follow this dietary paradigm that they are told is the best for a certain disease. So for example, with the low fat vegan crowd, they have been following this dietary paradigm, which I will fully admit I used to subscribe to until I became a cardiologist and understood lipidology and understood what polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats and how they can be beneficial. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a low-fat plant-based diet, but what I'm saying is that I empathize with people who they are looking for. So if someone's had, for example, some of my patients who have had severe heart attacks and they are scared for their lives, and so they are looking for the nutrition path that's going to help them live longer. And I totally can understand why, for many of my patients who've had severe coronary artery disease or heart attacks, they will follow any nutrition plan that is told to them to be the best for coronary artery disease. And what I've realized through my evolution in nutrition is that I think undoubtedly eating more plants and more whole foods is most beneficial. But does the data show us we have to be 100% plant-based? No. I personally am, as you guys know, I'm an ethical vegan. Even if all the research came out that said, red meat makes you live longer, which I don't suspect that'll ever happen. But even if it did, I wouldn't start eating meat. But that being said, I am really on a mission to make sure that I'm sharing the most fair, unbiased nutrition education, especially in our program, since we're doing continuing medical education and we want to be able to reach physicians and practitioners with really fair, unbiased info. But that being said, so I think that some of my patients who have severe coronary artery disease, they are willing to follow the most stringent diet of any kind because it's understandable. Like once you've been through a massive heart attack or you've had heart failure or, you've VFib arrested. I've had a patient that, came to me after a massive MI with VT and died on the table, was shocked back to life. And so it's understandable from that fear standpoint. It's, patients are looking for a diet that they feel that they've been told will, either reverse disease or that will, help them live longer and that will prevent that from happening again. Like I really empathize with that. And especially, and on the other end of that is people in the keto community. I know there's a lot of people that are super passionate about not eating any carbs, even a banana, because, I'm sure there's, like you were saying, kind of like a group psychological mentality for that with support and kind of eliminate certain foods. And I have empathy for people in both of these positions. But what I think, especially what we want to do at Learn, is explain the science, because first and foremost, I think the most important thing that I know Kevin will agree with, there is no diet on this earth that's going to 100% prevent you from any disease process. It's just not possible. There's so many other factors. Nutrition is one factor of health. There's so many factors beyond nutrition and beyond genetics and beyond environment that we still don't understand. And so my goal, and I know Kevin's goal too, is, I want my patients to live the longest and happiest life in whatever way, shape, or form that takes for them. And I think that, our courses, we really want to cover the science for both the evidence behind when people need medications as well. We're going to be going through guideline-directed medical therapy and how to even diagnose certain things, as well as the evidence we have for the nutrition in this space. And one example of a course that I think a lot of people listening are really going to be interested in is our hyperlipidemia course. So that's the high cholesterol course, and our course on coronary artery disease. We're going to go through all of the data and the lipidology data and all of the research that has demonstrated all different effects of different dietary patterns with coronary artery disease and with lipids. And I just am excited for people who right now fear so much different kinds of foods, for them to actually learn, the tons of studies we're going to cover, and for them to feel more liberated to make food decisions that work for them based on the actual evidence rather than just based on what someone says, Yeah.
And that might, at the end of the day, they stick on their low-fat plant-based diet or keto diet or whatever they're doing.
It's great.
There's nothing wrong with those diets. I think I want to be clear that my concern mostly lies in the fact that people have been told that those are the only ways to
yes, exactly.
And diet, at least for myself, I've done different structures.
You've done all of it. You've done the whole spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something, different parts of your life call for different diets, and there's not one diet to rule them all. And I think oftentimes people, especially within the sort of vegan and plant-based communities, act like, well, the moment you cut out all animal products, that's all you have to do. And I think I run into a lot of people who reach out to me and are like, I've gone plant-based and all my problems have gone away, and actually my GI symptoms are worse, and XYZ doesn't feel great either. And they sort of believe that protein and calcium and B12 and all these things don't matter based off of reading dogmatic stuff on the internet. And I'm just like, that's part of why we want to do these courses, is to let people know what the best evidence we have says, and then people can make a choice from that perspective. And especially when people are getting into the really nitty gritty kind of things,
like avocado.
Or what type of B12 is best.
Oh my gosh, methylcobalamin versus cyanocobalamin.
Yeah. And so that's one of those things where people have made it seem like if you eat cyanocobalamin, you're just about to kill yourself. And there's basically no strong evidence to support that, not even suggestive evidence to support that. But to go through to teach people, those are good case studies for okay, why do people think that this matters so much? And then what does the actual metabolism work and the human feeding study work show us about the
especially with lipids.
Yeah.
I feel like Kevin is a lipid expert. And I think, oh my gosh, I just can't wait for you guys to take our lipids course, because I think combined, I did lipid training and extensive lipid training my third year of cardiology fellowship and lipid clinic, and learned so much from the clinical side. Kevin is like a lipid nutrition science genius, and I just cannot wait for us to cover, because I think in lipids, from both perspectives, from both kind of groups, some people believe foods with saturated fat don't matter at all. Some people believe foods with that's one perspective in the keto arm, and then there's some people who believe that unsaturated fat in the plant-based arm, that they think avocado and nuts are going to cause heart disease. And I'm so excited to really dig deep into this with you in our courses, because I think that for most people, there's a huge fear to eat certain foods. And I, as I said before, and like you said, we empathize with that fear, but I think that it's liberating for people to see all of the science, as much research as possible. We're going to stuff so much science into these courses, and then make a decision for themselves. And
I think we don't want to I don't want to scare people and think it's going to be like Biochem 101.
No.
Science is really a lot of the questions that people ask about nutrition or are put forth in the media, I think have, from a nutrition science perspective, are either like they're half complete or they're unscientific. Like when people ask, is XYZ unhealthy? It's like, well, I think everybody kind of intuitively knows that it matters how much you're eating and what you're eating instead of it. And those sort of questions get sort of lost. And it's really, I think there's just almost a philosophy of nutrition science of how to think about these sort of things that we're asking. And it's something that you can look at most headlines and say like, oh, that's like half the question. Like, are eggs unhealthy? Well, I don't know. Is this article really going to go in and talk about all the randomized controlled trials that have swapped out egg intake for lentils or, you know, muffins or whatever and measured a bunch of outcomes? And does that data even exist? Because it doesn't.
Exactly.
And so like once you realize the ideal study design for something, and then you look at the data that we have, there's often quite a big gap between the data we have and what would be the ideal study design to answer that question. And that's where I think you get to fill in like your own personal preferences and what you want to try out and what your goals are. And you remove the dogma, you put in a little bit of science to inform the decision, in addition to all the other things that go into how you choose to enjoy your food.
Agreed. And I think that I think that since I've been on, anyone that has been listening to this podcast or follows me on social media knows I've had a bit of an evolution in my nutrition viewpoint. And I think that a lot of it, what it comes down to for me is that I've realized, that there are so many ways to be healthy. Obviously, at IOPBM, we focus on plant predominant or fully plant-based diets. But there's so many ways to be healthy within that sphere, and there's so many ways to do it in a well-planned way. And I think that this is where the importance of combining, Kevin's unbelievably amazing skills as a registered dietitian with me on the clinical side, from the medical standpoint, that the reason why this is so important to power within RD is because, I used to think you could just kind of eat plants of any sort of kind, as long as they were whole foods. You didn't have to think about certain nutrient deficiencies or does protein even matter? Or, there's so much confusion in this space. And I'm excited to touch on that too, because I think that in the plant-based space, I think we don't focus on the well-planned part enough.
Oh, 100%. And also there's not one well-planned. I mean, well-planning changes as you age. It depends on different like reproductive states. Like I study pregnancy, nutrition research, and I'm a little bit horrified when I read stuff online where people are like, oh, if you just cut out all animal products, like you're going to have the healthiest pregnancy, your PCOS is going to go away, like all of these claims. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like it's actually kind of concerning because, from a nutrition perspective, pregnancy is often the time where the nutrients and animal products that are very bioavailable are just convenient sources of the nutrient. You have to work a little bit harder to get them from a plant-based diet in an appropriate way. So it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, there are times when a well-planned plant-based diet matters a good bit. I think we see this, with vegan bodybuilders and stuff like that too. It's not that you need to be obsessed with protein, but also like optimizing your amino acids can really help you optimize and get the most out of that workout when you're putting it in. And it's not that you're not going to get any benefits from working out if you just eat a whatever vegan diet, but there's certainly a gradient of benefits that you're going to get from diet. And even within a plant-based confines, you can make some tweaks and see some results at the end of the day, which is, I think, what nutrition is all about. I mean, I love when I see people who are like able to transform their lives and stick to it and love it all at once. But I think a lot of people don't prefer to work that way, and getting the little tips here and there about things you can change and try out that, might matter for you, might not, but go for it. That's like goal setting 101. It's a lot of what dietitians do.
I agree. And I think that, so one thing people have asked me about Learn with IOPBM, I've had some people ask me like, well, you're doing these same really scientific courses that they're open for patients, but then people can register for them for CME credit. Should we have two separate courses? And what's so interesting is it just shows me how much people kind of, I've had so many people actually ask me this, and it kind of shows to me how much people kind of minimize how much our patients want to know. And I know this, if any of my patients who are listening, I love you guys, they're so empowered. They show up to every patient appointment with all of the data, with the latest studies, and they want to discuss it. And they're really informed. And even my patients who aren't that into the medicine research and stuff like that. When I sit there and explain to my patients or show them their coronary artery calcium on their cardiac CT, speak to them at the level that they deserve to be spoken to about science and about medicine, I really think it resonates with patients more. And so I don't want anyone listening to this to think like it's really sounds like a really overwhelming, like you said, Kevin, where it's not Biochem 101. We're definitely going to have, you can understand it at all levels. You do not need to be a doctor. You do not need to be in dietetics at all to understand nutrition, because what we're going to be sharing with nutrition. Because the truth is that as a physician, many of you listening know, we get no nutrition education in medical training.
Yeah, I was going to say, you took the patient side there, and I was going to be like, I have met so many non-nutrition clinicians who think that nutrition is so simple. And then when you actually bring a nutrition study to a journal club and they present it one way,
That's
and I'm like,
happened to me.
Here's 4 or 5 other ways that you could have interpreted that data that they hadn't thought about. So I think
100%.
for the healthcare professionals too, it's definitely, you know more than you think, but at the same time, there's a lot of nuances to nutrition science that some of the training and how you look at medical research doesn't quite apply so easily. I mean, just a little snippet, there's really no placebo for most foods. And oftentimes, you look at the majority of the nutrition literature, and it's a study where they compare one food versus another food. And it's like, okay, so is the one food bad or is the other food good? And you could have a 12-arm study design comparing all different foods against each other. And, these study designs can get really complex and really nuanced. And oftentimes it's very frustrating to see in the media, headlines where people are like, oh, almonds are good or walnuts are good or whatever. And then it's like, okay, they compared it to a muffin though. Is the muffin really the thing that's just not so great?
Yes.
Or is it that the almonds or walnuts are amazing? And I think when you start with, okay, there's not a placebo, so that makes a lot of designs really crazy. And then, there's also not a lot of nutrients also contain calories. So if you think that olive oil is really bad, you can't just do a study where you feed olive oil or don't feed olive oil, because you're also feeding calories at the same time. So you can't conclude, was it putting more calories into the person or was it the olive oil that was bad? So you have to get a comparator oil. And then you're like, wow, there's a lot of comparator oils though. And again, you get these your ideal study design would be this super complex study that we only have a few parts of the field where we actually have a lot of these different pairwise comparisons of a bunch of different foods or nutrient profiles against each other. Much of the literature is unfortunately a little bit limited, but in that limitation also allows us a little bit more freedom to, design a diet that we want, and for you to assess whether you think this is super important or not quite as important as you were told, but still kind of important to want to do it, and allow you to give for practitioners out there, allow you to give your patients a little bit more options and a little bit less dogma, while also still, at the end of the day, producing results.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great, an excellent way to put it. And, any physician that's listening, the amount of nutrition training we get in medical school is so low that if you haven't really delved into nutrition, I think this is a great place to start, because even though I advocate for a plant-based or plant-predominant diet, this is not, you do not have to go vegan after listening to this. Even if, for me, if this helps people go from eating 20% plants to 50% plants in their diet, I think that's a win. If you want to go 100% plant-based, I think that's also a win. But I think that there's many levels to this, and we really just want to help everyone kind of understand nutrition science and even how to go plant-based in general. We even have, like Kevin had mentioned, our intro to plant-based nutrition, just how to go plant-based for people that, because I think there's going to be people from all over the spectrum taking our courses. Some people that are already plant-based and they want to learn about these nuances with avocado and olive oil. And then there's going to be the which I totally get, because it really is a nuance. It's a very, very nuanced area of nutrition. And there's so many questions, and I totally respect and understand everyone's questions in this space because it's confusing. But then there's going to be people that are taking these courses that are listening to this podcast right now, and you're like, wait, what? I can't eat avocado? I mean, by the way, you can. But, people that aren't even involved in nutrition. And so I promise you our courses won't be just on the nuances. We're going to cover everything. They're really detailed. That's why it's 2 days long for our intro courses. The first day is like a really intro to plant-based nutrition science kind of day. The second day is going to focus all on cardiovascular disease. And I just think it's pretty much one of the most proud projects I've been involved in yet, because I think that this can really help healthcare providers. I've been looking around to see what kind of nutrition CMEs exist. There aren't many. And so I think that this can help doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, PAs, all of you to kind of learn more and also really understand when we should be referring to a registered dietitian for medical nutrition therapy. And I can't wait for Kevin to be able to get into that as well, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, I'm excited to start seeing some patients with you.
Yeah. I think that also, one of the other big issues with like nutrition science in general that we kind of get lost in is that, okay, you being someone who's incredibly knowledgeable about nutrition science, and you are actually literally one of the top experts in the whole world, what do you think is currently the issue within certain dietary groups, whether it be vegan or keto, the way they present the data to consumers for both patients and physicians? Meaning the way the data in either of these groups kind of fall into the belief that one specific food or one specific anything is really dangerous. Like, how do you think that we combat that? And how do we get people to, like you said, just kind of, be able to enjoy food, enjoy what they're eating without fearing certain random food items from time to time?
So sort of what I was saying before, in that, to your ideal study designs, in many of these situations, be it food or a dietary pattern, if you really think keto is the best thing in the world always, it's sort of this answer, it's a core nutrition science question we always come back to: compared to what? And oftentimes, I always joke the best way to make your favorite diet look good is to compare it to a diet that is full of tons and tons of added sugars and added saturated fats and trans fats and refined grains. And you just, there are those things where there is, like, when they predominate in the diet, there is basically no question that they are going to worsen all of the markers of health that we can measure. And I'm saying when they predominate, like when you're eating most of your calories from those sources of foods. And that is the easiest way in nutrition science to make your favorite diet look good, because anything compared to a mostly saturated fat and sugar and sodium and trans fat and refined grain rich diet is going to look good.
Right.
And that happens a lot in these studies, that, they take people who are eating the standard American diet, which is typically not so great, and then they change them to either a keto diet or a whole foods plant-based diet, where there are a number of reasonable changes where you cut out a lot of the nutrients in foods that we think are not so great for these markers, and then they improve when you replace them with the dietary guidance. But I think Kevin Hall has started to do some of this literature that the keto folks who work in research and like keto a lot are comparing it to these blah diets, and then the plant-based people are doing the same thing, but there aren't many people who are comparing like the most idealized keto diets versus the most idealized plant-based diets and everything in between. And there are so many different variations of those diets that you could spend an entire research career running feeding trials comparing XYZ plant-based diet, a low-fat plant-based diet versus a moderate fat versus a very high-fat plant-based diet versus an animal-based keto diet, comparing every outcome under the sun under every different population. And at present, we don't have that data, which is what I think, for me, is something that everybody, I think we'll go into this a good bit more in all of our courses, but I think it's something that people should keep in mind, that in the core of nutrition science is always about how much are you eating versus, and then what are you comparing it to? And then what's sort of the background context of the diet that it's being consumed in. So, you get this a lot in the keto literature where they're like, okay, saturated fat's only bad if you're eating a lot of carbs at the same time. But when you think about those three things as being the core tenets of nutrition science that should be guiding how you think about the field, you often realize we don't have multiple doses of a nutrient or food compared to multiple doses of 4 or 5 other nutrients or foods that we can then make a really strong inference that there's something uniquely amazing about almonds or uniquely amazing about certain types of fats. And then once you could do those same studies in a bunch of different background contexts as well. So you could compare olive oil versus walnut oil versus canola oil versus safflower oil in a low-fat background or in a very, very high-fat background too. And the I guess like the factorial, the number of study designs this could turn into would be just huge. But it's important to keep that in mind because that is really the ideal. We would want to be making a bunch of comparisons. Like, if you're going to say walnuts are so much better than almonds or that olive oil is uniquely bad for endothelial health, you have to ask compared to what, how much are you eating, and in what background context of the diet. And I think that can like be something that often makes people become a little bit nihilistic about nutrition and be like, we can't do anything. And it's like, no, it's you can make informed actions and choices still. And for dietitians, it's great. It's like, okay, we see some almonds here, and we know that or we see some muffins here, and we know that if you replace them with almonds, there'll be some benefits for blood lipid markers or whatever. But it should prevent us from saying like, oh, almonds are a cure-all for cardiovascular disease. And the same thing happens with olive oil. People seem to think it's like uniquely going to kill your arteries. And we don't have like data saying that olive oil is like so incredibly amazing for cardiovascular disease that everybody needs to be eating it. But we don't have the data to say that people need to fear it at all intakes and in all dietary contexts.
That's such a good point. For anyone listening that is interested, we at Learn with IOPVM, we're going to be doing our educational courses, but then at IOPVM in general, we're going to be doing, me and Kevin are co-directors of the Department of Research. And so at IOPVM, Angie Sadeghi is our president. She has created a nonprofit arm called Planted in Health, and we are going to be looking to start research projects on multiple different kinds of plant-based diets. One thing that I would love to look at, me and Kevin were talking about, was looking at soft plaque and coronary artery disease with cardiac CTA, and looking at different kinds of plant-based diets. So a low-fat plant-based diet, a moderate fat plant-based diet, and a higher fat plant-based diet, all with fat that's mono and polyunsaturated fat. That's never been looked at. Actually, there's been no dietary study looking at soft plaque because coronary angiogram does not look at soft plaque unless you use OCT or IVUS. So a great non-invasive way to do that would be with cardiac CTA. So if anyone is interested in helping us, get this research study going, our nonprofit we are accepting donations. Also, we're going to be applying for grants. This is going to be a study that probably will be done over a long period of time because we're going to wait for COVID to kind of clear up, but we want to get the ball rolling on some of our research. And I think that there's a lot of people interested in this research question. And throughout my cardiovascular training, cardiac CTA became more and more fascinating to me. So I think it would be a good way. I mean, there's endless research studies that we could do at IOPVM and that we will do, considering we have specialists from everywhere from rheumatology to GI to, cardiology to fertility, women's health. And we have so many amazing registered dietitians, and Kevin has so much great research space experience that I think it's going to be really interesting to see, especially in this long-standing cardiovascular disease question is, what is the optimal kind of plant-based diet? That question hasn't been answered.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing when you see like people have such strong feelings about whether like high fiber carbohydrates are better or worse than polys or monounsaturated fatty acids, and they're trying to make inferences from study designs that were never set out to test that. And it would be there's really not many people who love plant-based diets typically aren't doing research to compare different types of plant-based diets against each other. They're taking a standard American Heart Association diet or a standard Western diet background and comparing against like some super idealized strict version of a plant-based diet. But nobody is saying like these are our idealized plant-based diets that are moderate fat with some olive oil. And then here's our very low fat versions of these where we've cut out some of the olive oil and replaced it with more like starches, whole grain starches and lentils. And there's a lot of nutrients being changed there at a time, but it's a very pragmatic thing that a lot of people are doing, and a lot of people are making claims that if you were to cut out all the olive oil from your pasta salad thing that you're doing or whatever, and just focus on the fibrous starches that it would be better. And nobody's actually ever compared that head to head.
Right.
And I think every diet camp is the first to point out that like, oh, they made keto look good by comparing it to like sugar and refined grains, or they made low-fat plant-based by comparing it to sugar and refined grains, but nobody's comparing idealized versions of diets against each other. And often I think it's because researchers know that the effect size between these two idealized versions is going to be so tiny. Like, I think at the end of the day, there's a very good chance that your idealized plant-based diet with a little bit more starchy carbs that are fibrous versus your idealized plant-based diet that's a little bit more unsaturated fat rich are probably going to have very similar effects. And you would need a huge study to be able to detect the really small effects between the two. And that's, I'm hypothesizing there. But I'm saying that like people aren't running those studies because we know that you can detect an effect of diet when you have a really, not so great, poorly designed diet, poorly planned versus a really well-planned diet. But to compare two well-planned diets against each other, it's a much smaller signal that you're looking for. But that's often in the wellness and nutrition space is what people spend the most time debating about. And it's what we have the least data to inform.
Agreed. I think that also the reason why I think that, especially with our lipid course or CAD course, I think, and I can't emphasize this enough, that my goal, and I know Kevin's goal, isn't to tell anyone how to eat or what you should eat. It's to present the science and let people really decide what is best for them and what they want to eat and what they like. Meaning that if you love a low-fat plant-based diet, you do great on that. That's amazing. Stick with it. But I think one thing that's important is that...
And present the guidelines.
Yes, of course, we're presenting all the guidelines. But I think what's important is that, there's some people, the reason why these small nuances in nutrition do matter is because I'm very familiar with the vegan space, and I've had patients say to me like, oh, I can't go vegan because I can't give up like all avocado or olive oil, et cetera. And it's because they think that there's only one way to go vegan. And what I'm trying to emphasize is that the low-fat plant-based diet, we don't even have the science to show that that's the optimal and only way to eat a plant-based diet. So I think that in these nuances, although it really affects a small population, I think that in ways, because of the way it's been presented by, nutrition, people in nutrition in medicine for so long in the vegan space, and same with the keto space, they have their own same parallel kind of, issues, that it kind of deters some people from going plant-based because they think that's the only healthy way to do it. When that's just, we don't know that that's the truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I became a dietitian because I didn't want to write very many prescriptions. So, and I want to help people, meet them where they're at. And
yes,
I think that's the goal.
That's totally the goal. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for chatting and for going through all of this. You guys, if you haven't checked out our website yet, or you haven't seen from social media, please check out learn.iopbm.org and check out our courses for September. We're doing our live first virtual courses September 19th and 20th. It is going to be so fun. This is a podcast episode that we just wanted to introduce you guys to Kevin, catch up on life, and really just tell you all that, we're going to have a lot more interesting educational research, clinical, different things coming your way with IOPBM, and we really hope you'll join us.
Yeah, and if you have suggestions for courses or hot topics, definitely send them to us. We're going to take suggestions and sort of prioritize and put them in bins and see if we can make other courses to address some hot topic questions.
And Kevin, tell everyone where they can find you on social media.
Oh yeah, both my Twitter and my Instagram are at KC Klatt, Klatt, just my initials and last name.
And we are trying to force Kevin he's very active on Twitter, so definitely follow him on Twitter. But I know a lot of people our age don't really go on Twitter much. Everyone's on Instagram, so we're trying to push Kevin into doing more Instagramming.
I know.
We need you in the Instagram space. And guys, there's also an amazing list. I don't want to forget this. There's an amazing list of Black-owned vegan food companies, Black-owned vegan grocery stores, Black-owned vegan beauty brands, Black-owned vegan restaurants all around the country, from Veg News, that I'm going to also include in the show notes because it's so comprehensive. If I read it to you, it would take a really long time, but I want you guys to be able to take a look at this list. It's unbelievable. There's just like at least 100 amazing companies that we should all be supporting.
Yeah, and I'm going to send you a list also. I didn't say before, but I have a bunch of the best books that I've read on issues
amazing. Perfect.
not only like the history of racism, but particularly within scientific communities. There's been a lot of scientific and medical racism. There's a really great book of medical apartheid I'm rereading right now. But there's so much education that we did not get in our schooling here in America, and definitely not in our medical educations. I think it's important, particularly as we talk about everything from obesity to different types of foods and all, to understand how those topics have intersected with race throughout history and what they mean to different people. So there's some books that I think can provide some perspective there.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to see that. That's really useful and helpful. And I think that a lot of us can use right now some additional reading, considering we've all been, quarantined, and, everyone's change of life right now. I think everyone I know is looking for more things to read, more information to digest, anything that's not the news, I guess, at this point. So thank you for sharing that. And for everyone listening, I love you guys. I'm so excited for this new kind of step in the journey, and to bring you as much more information as humanly possible. And yeah, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining. And this will not be the last time you hear from him. All right. Thanks, guys.